When I imagine the cock carousel, I imagine an actual carousel, like a big giant merry-go-round. And instead of, those brightly painted horses and animals that all the kids like to hop onto and ride around in circles and everything, my kids love that, so I've done it quite a bit lately. Um, Instead of all that, there are brightly painted pink phalluses. Well, pink and tan and brown and all sorts of different shades. Multi-shaded, multi-hued phalluses. Just rows and rows of, of these phalluses. And, they're all about as big as those little painted horses are. And they're all wearing like brightly colored saddles with cute little straps and reins. And each one of them has one of those little poles going through it that, you hold on to when you're riding on an actual carousel, and all the women are lined up to get onto this giant carousel of phalluses. And there's a sign like posted nearby, most be under 30 to ride. And they all get in line, they all get up and onto the ride, and they wander around the carousel for a little while, and then they find a phallus and they mount it, and then they shout something like "wee" as the carousel goes around a time or two. And then once it's gone around a time or two, they dismount their phallus and go pick another phallus out. That's how I imagine the cock carousel. When people say the cock carousel, that's what's playing inside my head. And it's a very fun image, and it's a very vivid image, and it's a very immediate image that can be conjured from a term like cock carousel, but I don't know how accurate of an image it is. And so I wanted to talk about the cock carousel and the ways that people end up riding the cock carousel and what it actually means to ride the cock carousel, because I've heard some different definitions. And my cat, of course, is making a lot of noise. I might have to go and get him in a second. So, some of the ways that I've heard people use the term cock carousel is a woman has multiple men that she goes to, that she's kind of holding a casual relationship with simultaneously. And so she has different men that she just kind of hops from cock to cock with, I guess, from phallus to phallus with. And let's try to keep this, we're not keeping it PG, but let's try to keep it mildly appropriate. So she's hopping from phallus to phallus to phallus, but it's all kind of in the same timeline, like time frame, depending on the night, depending on the hour of the day. Oof. So there's that. I've seen people describe it in that way, but then there's the other cock carousel where it's just she's going from guy to guy to guy to guy to guy, and either way the carousel's going around, and she's picking a new phallus every time the ride stops, and then she hops onto a new one, and the ride starts up again, and she's got a new phallus, and she rides it around. That's the cock carousel that I pictured when I heard the term, and I think, I could be wrong, but I think that's the cock carousel that people think about when they use the term. Not necessarily that she has an entire carousel of cocks lined up, but that she is constantly hopping from, phallus to phallus as she rides around on this merry-go-round. The thing about the cock carousel is everybody uses it kind of in reference to talk about the point at which she hits the wall, at which she hits about 30, and one of the attendants taps her on the shoulder and tells her she's too old to ride this ride now and she has to get off. And then she goes into this like panic mode and expects a man to come and take care of her, and he's got to be just as awesome as the nicest phallus that she rode on that carousel. That's kind of the idea that comes with the cock carousel. Like, that's the accompanying idea, that women will ride this carousel until the point that they can't ride it anymore. They get kicked off and suddenly they're in a panic mode. So I wanted to talk about the different ways that you can ride the cock carousel. And I want to talk about this kind of for women too. It's not just men who need to know about the cock carousel. It's kind of women as well, because there's a reason that the term exists, and it's not always the most helpful term. So you start off with your classic cock carousel behavior, and I've seen women do this. I've had friends who've done this. I had one friend in particular who used to describe her new boyfriends to me starting with their genitalia and then moving outward, but she didn't really go into too much detail with the moving outward. She could tell me length, girth, width, more details than I ever wanted to know. And she could tell me what their names were. I don't think she ever learned if they had any hobbies or not, and I don't think she cared. But the width and the girth and the length and the, God only knows what, all of that she was very much aware of. And she was very happy about this, and it never seemed to dawn on her that I thought it was pretty weird and unhealthy. But then again, I'm unusual. So you got your classic cock carousel behavior. Woman gets onto the carousel. Woman hops from guy to guy, from phallus to phallus. She likes the bright shiny saddle over here, so she hops on that one, and that one looks really big over there, so she hops on that one. She goes all around the carousel as many times as she can go, as many rides as she can ride, until sometime in, someone taps her on the shoulder and says, "I'm sorry, ma'am, you're 30, it's time to get off." And maybe some women push it as far as 35, but you get the idea. Some women don't push it that far. Some of them realize at about 28-ish that they've got, some problems looming on the horizon. That's one way to ride the cock carousel. But there are other ways that women wind up in the same situation without ever having ridden the cock carousel. There are some women who stand in line, and they're waiting in line, and they're waiting in line, and they're waiting in line. So they're waiting in line for forever. And time is passing. And the carousel is going around and around, and they're watching it going around in front of them, and they're just standing very patiently in line. And at some point, one of the attendants taps them on the shoulder and says, "I'm sorry, ma'am, you're 30. You can't ride on this ride." And there are a few different ways that women end up doing that, and you might be thinking, well, women don't do that. And it's like, yes, they do. Yes, they do, because I've seen it firsthand. So it does exist. In at least a few scenarios, it exists. But I'm pretty sure that it exists in more scenarios than just the ones I've witnessed personally. You have your religious girls who were told to wait for Mr. Right, and so they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and old maids happen. It might not be as common, and that's one of the things that I'm not so sure about. I don't know the percentages here, and we're going to get into that in a second, of how often these sorts of things happen. How many women are riding around on all the phalluses on the cock carousel? How many women are waiting in line? And just expecting that someone special is going to come along. And maybe I've seen women who were very, very involved in their studies. They get told as little girls growing up, by their very, very well-intentioned parents, pursue your studies, pursue your career, situate yourself in a really high-ranking place, and then you're going to find some wonderful man with a doctorate and a really high-paying job, and he's going to be able to be the kind of husband that you deserve, my sweet little girl. And so they do exactly what their mom and dad told them to do. And frequently these are really, really, really intelligent young girls, frequently from religious backgrounds. You got to have that kind of religious wait for marriage plus, high intelligence plus academia. It's a perfect storm, but it happens. They just keep waiting in line, and it's like, well, I just finished my master's, I'm working on my doctorate. Sooner or later, I'm going to find a really awesome guy. I'm probably going to find him at this job that I'm going to have when I finally get out of school. Except when they finally get out of school, because I remember I knew a gal who got her doctorate. She was an exotic dancer, and I remember when she got her doctorate, and she was like, I think she was in her late 20s, and I mean, she was smart enough to get married long before she got her doctorate, but it's like, hello there, kitty. You can't see it, but the cat is literally walking back and forth underneath my camera. She at least was smart enough to get married before she got her doctorate, but I mean, it took her forever. If you're putting off dating until you get that, you could be really hurting in the dating market when you finally get that. And if you're going to be a medical doctor, then there's a residency, and then there's, another delay and another delay and another delay. And young women have been told this is what they should do. And not always by people who are just trying to get money out of them at the college, Their parents might tell them to do this. My parents told me to do this. I mean, obviously, I didn't take that route. I went out and become a stripper instead. But, my parents told me to do this. And if I had listened to them, I would be in a pretty bad way. There are the girls who are shy, and I really don't know how many of these exist. I do believe that they probably exist. I've never seen one, but odds are that there's one of them out there somewhere who exists, who doesn't even get into line for the cot carousel. She just stands over at the edge of the ride. You know, they got that safety railing around there so you don't accidentally walk right into the damn thing. She's probably standing at the rail just looking at the phalluses going around and around in front of her and thinking that one of these days, one of those phalluses, my battery's dying, one of these days, one of these phalluses is going to animate itself and hop off the carousel and come prancing up to her and say, let's ride off into the sunset together. And I mean, again, I don't know how often that happens. I don't know if that, I'm sure it's happened at least once. I can't say that I believe it never happens. I don't know how often it happens in this society at this point in time in this social climate. It's possible. And the reason I think it's possible is because that was exactly what I was set up to do. That's exactly what everyone told me to do. Everyone told me, don't worry about the fact that none of the men around you are attractive. Just don't worry about it. Sooner or later, someone right for you will come up. And I kept on wondering, how the hell is a smart, ambitious, handsome, hardworking man going to end up in the ass end of nowhere? Like, is his car suddenly going to break down in the ass end of nowhere while he's driving his way to a business trip in some other more interesting, more fruitful part of the world? Like, is there going to be some sort of plane delay as they, how would the kind of guy that I want end up here? It seemed pretty impossible. But, everybody told me, just wait, just be patient. You're too impatient. And I kept on looking and it's like, well, the years are going by and I'm watching them go by one by one. And it's like, how patient exactly do you expect me to be? If I had listened to them, I would be an old maid by now. I would be a barren old maid who lives with too many cats. Hello, sir. I still live with too many cats, but at least I have a husband and some children, so there's that. Hey, buddy, thank you for being my prop for this video. Yeah, I mean, it can happen. It is possible that such a thing can occur. And I don't think we should entirely rule out the possibility that such things do occur in the world. What do all of these women have in common when the attendant taps them on the shoulder and says, I'm sorry, ma'am, you can't ride this ride? Well, most of them, the vast majority, I'm sure that somewhere out there in the world, because I believe there's an exception to every rule. So somewhere out there in the world, there's some woman who genuinely was trying to find a good man. And she just didn't find any. And maybe it's because she had a horrible scar on her face. Maybe it was because she had a lot of physical problems that she had to overcome. Maybe it was because she lived in an extremely rural place and for whatever reason she couldn't leave. Sounds familiar. Maybe it was just because of things that were outside of her control, but she looked and she looked and she looked and she couldn't find anyone. I'm sure somewhere out there in the world there is a girl who wasn't riding the carousel who was genuinely looking for a good man in some way or another and just could not find a good man. But all the rest of the girls, all the rest of the women who were hopping from phallus to phallus along the carousel, the women who were waiting in line endlessly while they finished up their most recent degree, their doctorate, their second master's in whatever, God knows what. Or, even the girls who were just dreamily staring at the carousel, waiting as the years passed and hoping that one of the phalluses would become animated and offer to take her off into the sunset. All these women had one thing in common, except for the exception to the rule, because there's always an exception. Most of these women had something in common, and it's that they never took marriage seriously. They never took marriage, starting a family, all of these things that you do in life that I think a lot of women, even myself to a certain extent, I remember sitting around thinking, well, I want to have kids eventually. I want to get married someday. I want that someday. It seemed like this very distant idea. And it's like that for many, many women, for most women, perhaps for all women. It's this distant idea. It's a very ubiquitous idea. So it's definitely something that's culturally, there. And most women have this idea that, well, I want to have kids someday. Women going into abortion clinics to get abortions because they got pregnant by accident are sitting around thinking, well, I want to have kids someday. They really do think that as they're getting the abortion. They might be in their mid-20s and they're thinking that as they're getting the abortion. This is not uncommon. I've read many accounts of many women who got abortions because, I had an abortion, so I was reading up on it quite a lot. I made a bunch of videos about abortion that no one's ever going to want to watch because nobody actually cares about abortion. A lot of women are thinking this, even when they're doing things that absolutely defeat the goal of getting married and having kids. They're still thinking this at some point in their mind. But there's a difference between thinking it, like, oh, I want to have kids someday, I want to have a husband someday, and actively making it a priority. If you're hopping from phallus to phallus along the carousel, and you're just, riding up and down as the carousel goes around and shouting "wee" because it's fun, you're not taking marriage seriously. You're not looking for a good mate, a good lifelong companion. You're having fun, you're partying, you're having a good time, good for you, whatever, but you're not taking it seriously, and at some point someone's going to tap you on the shoulder and tell you it's time to get off the ride. If you're standing in line for forever and you're really, really intently focused on becoming a pediatrician, which is a very noble and honorable goal to have, if you're so focused on that you're not, that you're putting off this idea that eventually you want to have a husband, you want to have kids, eventually someone's going to tap you on the shoulder and tell you, hey, you know what, you're too old to ride this ride. And it's scary because at that point you haven't even had a chance to get on the ride. And it's like, oh shoot, now I got to scramble. Now I got to find someone. And maybe it's not because you were being irresponsible in the sense that you weren't hopping from phallus to phallus and partying, but you weren't taking the goal of marriage and a family seriously. And I know really, really intelligent, very serious women who are very hardworking and very goal-oriented, who, they just didn't quite get around to it. And part of that, I think, is this idea that a lot of women get fed, where it's like, don't worry, someone will come around. Someone good for you is out there. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Don't, just focus on your studies and someone will pop up. Someone will show up. And that's the third option. That's the girl who's sitting there dreamily staring at the phalluses as they go around on the merry-go-round. Sooner or later, someone's just going to come into my life. It's just going to happen. And she's not taking it seriously either. She's waiting for something that, isn't going to happen on its own necessarily. If you're taking it seriously, I don't know exactly what the metaphorical equivalent is, but maybe you're climbing onto the carousel and you're walking around and you're studying the saddle of each phallus as you go past and saying, no, no, maybe, no. Like, I don't know. But you're looking, you're actively looking, you're actively pursuing and working toward a goal. Because if you're not working toward the goal in some way, it won't happen. Because the opportunity for it to happen is going to pass right by you. And you're not there to take it. There's plenty of fish in the sea. There's a wealth of really good men out there. And women, we have that really hot burning, early fertile period in our lives where we could really, really, we can go out there and carpe diem, seize the day, take a good man. we have that capacity. Women have that capacity. A young woman is just absolutely beautiful. She's absolutely breathtaking. She can totally find a man at that point in her life if she's actively pursuing that goal. And it strikes me as quite sad, really, because there are many women out there in the world who are virgins or, pretty close to being virgins, who are being told, ha, you rode the cock carousel and now you suffer for it. Now you have to deal with those consequences. Yes, they do have to deal with the consequences. They have to deal with the consequences sometimes of being told various lies by society, being blue-pilled, basically, for the women's version of blue pill. Maybe the consequences of their parents' bad advice because they trusted their parents and they believed their parents. And when their parents told them, you should focus on your studies, don't worry, a good man will come along. Women fall for that. You trust your parents. They've given you good advice all along up until this point, and now all of a sudden, not so much. I don't know if I see a lot of men making these universal statements. A lot of men, a lot of the less intellectual men too, but a lot of men in the red pill community, who are usually more black pilled than red pill, make these kind of overarching universal statements. And I think there are a lot of guys out there in the world who believe that all women are riding the cock carousel. And, I don't know how that metaphor exactly applies. Are all women living in the realm of the cock carousel? Are we all either standing in line or trying to pick out an individual phallus off the carousel to take home with us? Are we all hopping from phallus to phallus every time we go out on a date, even if there is no sex? Are we, how exactly does it apply? And that's something that I'm not remotely sure of. And maybe somebody can help me with that in the comments, because it's always been a mystery to me. There are plenty of women who are getting off of the ride really, really early. And it's not entirely clear how many of them, what percentage are riding the carousel and what percentage are sitting in line waiting. It's not clear what those percentages are. Now, if someone told me that the percentage of women riding the carousel has risen, the percentage of women waiting in line has lowered, and the percentage of women who are actually picking out a phallus and taking it home is dramatically dropped, I believe them. I think the statistics reflect that. I think every time that people write about how, millennials are postponing marriage until later on in life because, finances and goals. I mean, finances are definitely a problem. Finances are a huge problem. We're experiencing that firsthand. We're millennials. We're suffering financially along with everybody else. And I mean, we didn't postpone it. It's really weird because I take my kids to school and all the other moms are, not all, I mean, most of the other moms are considerably older than I am. I'd say considerably older. Not all of them. I know some moms who are close to my age, but I know a lot of moms who are older than me. And it's because, we didn't wait around forever. That has its drawbacks. Financially, there's no support for young people having kids these days. It's awful. There's no support for young people starting a family. Financially, it's a complete disaster. But also, young people who are postponing marriage, they're in that cock carousel scenario where it's like, okay, you're postponing marriage. Are you riding the phalluses on the fun merry-go-round? Are you waiting in line to finish up that doctorate? Are you taking it seriously? Or are you just not? Because it doesn't matter how good you are or how bad you are. If you run out of time, then you've run out of time. And you could be a virgin and still have run out of time. You could be a horrible slut and run out of time. The unfortunate thing is that people use the term, cock carousel to apply to any woman who's run out of time. And that's not particularly, I think, correct. Yes, they're all there in the realm of the cock carousel, either waiting in line or riding on the carousel or staring dreamily at all the phalluses as they go by. But I feel sorry for the ones that are listening to the advice of other people, but then again, most women are listening to the advice of other people in their lives, either to go out and party and have fun, or to wait and be serious and take your studies seriously because it will net you a better husband later on in the game. They're all listening to the bad advice of people around them. And really the only good advice is take it seriously. You know, you don't have to go pursuing a potential spouse to the complete neglect of, your own personal development. But you should be serious about it. You should be goal-oriented, because people who have a goal eventually reach the goal that they have. People who don't have a goal, they never reach it, because it was never a goal to begin with. It's very, very difficult to achieve something if you weren't even trying to achieve it in the first place. Some people blindly stumble into it, but, how common is that? How often does that happen? So, yeah, those are just a few thoughts on the cock carousel. I'm curious to know, do you guys think that all women are riding it and all women exist in the universe of the cock carousel? I'm curious about the women who, they stay virgins until they eventually find a phallus to take home with them to be their own special phallus. Were they on the carousel in any way, at any capacity? I mean, they certainly rode one phallus, but, it's only one. And I mean, that does happen. I think it's difficult for a lot of men to understand that does happen. That some women, they just wait until they find one guy. And that's it. It is a real thing that happens in the world. There was another statistic that I thought was interesting. There was this statistic on number of sexual partners, and I need to find the study and put a link in because there's all sorts of interesting, and I mean it's the same study. I haven't found the study itself, but I've seen lots of articles on the same study. They all cite the same numbers, so probably the same study then. And it was talking about how many, many people claim to have had anywhere from 2 to 4 partners in their life. And I think they might have said the majority, but a lot of people, which definitely doesn't sound like a cock carousel to me. Now, it also said that the youngest generation currently is having the most sex, or at least a rather, to me, alarming number of sexual partners, especially given their young age. They're already, really racking up the numbers. So, who knows? Maybe when people talk about the cock carousel, they're observing a real and genuine phenomenon, which is that young people who are out in the dating market are really churning through the new partners. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know. I'm curious. I'll talk to you guys later.